What about the tariff negotiations? I don't think there is going to be any quick solution, whoever is going to be in the position of the Japanese prime minister.
Shifting tides in global economic relations. Something big is happening on the global assembly line, and thousands of American jobs are at stake. As Japan looks beyond the U.S. for trade deals, whole communities in Michigan and Ohio are bracing for layoffs and uncertain futures, all tied to decisions made far from the factory floor. And there was a time when a gallon of milk seemed like the most stable thing in the world, part of every family's morning routine, poured into cereal bowls or coffee cups. But lately, economic tremors from across the Pacific are starting to shake even these simple comforts. As Japan hesitates to raise interest rates under U.S. pressure, a weaker yen and the threat of America printing more dollars could stoke inflation at home. That might sound far away, but for middle-aged families in places like California and Florida, the impact is real. A fresh wave of inflation could push up the price of milk by 8 to 10%. For a household with 2 kids, that's an extra $240 a year just for milk, swallowed up within a broader $2,400 rise in annual living costs. Suddenly, families are having to rethink even the basics. And maybe, for the first time, global finance feels close to home when even a carton of milk isn't immune to decisions made in Tokyo. 13. PIDO. Japan's warning on U.S. bonds. Who would have thought a single comment from Japan's finance minister could keep so many Americans up at night worrying about their homes? When Mr. Kato reminded Washington about Japan's $1 trillion in U.S. treasuries, middle-aged families with mortgages suddenly felt the ground shift. If Japan ever starts selling off those bonds, home loan rates could jump by 0.5 percentage point or more. For the average family in the suburbs, that could mean paying up to $3,600 extra per year on their mortgage, a sum big enough to cover a vacation, or a year of community college tuition for their kids. It's strange to realize that dreams of home ownership can be upended by financial maneuvers happening half a world away. These days, it seems, the American home is more vulnerable than we ever imagined to the currents of global finance. Piri. Japan expands ties beyond the U.S. In places like Michigan and Ohio, a car is more than just a way to get around. It's a source of pride and a livelihood for thousands of middle-aged Americans. But as Japan forges new trade deals and ramps up exports to countries beyond the U.S., the road ahead for American-made cars is getting bumpier. Some analysts say as many as 5,000 manufacturing jobs could disappear this year, each one a real person facing tough family conversations. Postponed car repairs, or dreams for their kids put on hold. For those who spent decades in the auto plants, the world's shifting trade routes are more than headlines. They're a slow-motion crisis unfolding in paychecks, lunch breaks, and the future of whole communities. As the global race accelerates, a quiet question lingers. How much longer can American cars and the people who build them hold on? Pure. Global trust in U.S. dollar wanes. No one likes trimming their weekly grocery list. But that's exactly what many middle-aged American families are now facing as trust in the U.S. dollar slips. Central banks around the world are turning to gold, euros, and yuan. And the greenback's value is eroding, making groceries, gas, and medicine more expensive. If this trend continues, everyday essentials could rise by 8%, adding over $2,000 a year to the cost of living for a typical family of 4. It's not just dinner plates that are affected. Families may have to tighten plans for saving, healthcare, or their kids' futures. In the end, the story of the dollar's strength is written at the American dinner table, where even pocket change is now part of a bigger, uncertain global story. Canada has unexpectedly stepped back from its plan to impose a digital services tax targeting major American tech firms. Why would a policy seen as reasonable and well justified be halted after just one statement from former President Donald Trump? On June 30, 2025, Canadian authorities officially announced the suspension of the 3% digital services tax on the Canadian revenues of multinational technology firms, including Amazon, Google, Meta, Uber, and Airbnb. Originally scheduled to take effect retroactively from 2022, the tax was projected to generate between $2 to $3 billion in total revenue for the Canadian government. The decision followed strong warnings from former U.S. President Donald Trump, who stated that Washington would halt trade negotiations and consider retaliatory tariffs if Canada proceeded with the tax. Ottawa's decision to step back was seen as a strategic effort to resume trade talks with the United States and reach a renewed agreement before the July 21st, 2025 deadline. The suspended DST had been expected to generate roughly 7.2 billion Canadian dollars, around 5.3 billion US dollars, over 5 years, approximately $1 billion annually. For US-based technology firms, this decision is likely to preserve an estimated $700 million to $2.3 billion in annual cost savings, ensuring continuity in investment plans and workforce stability. This development not only benefits large digital corporations by protecting their margins and reducing potential operational disruptions, but also contributes to a calmer investment climate. From the U.S. perspective, the avoidance of a trade rift helps shield American consumers and businesses from the unpredictable consequences of retaliatory tariffs or supply chain disturbances. For Canada, the choice to adjust fiscal policy highlights the complex balancing act between maintaining constructive bilateral trade relations and safeguarding domestic economic interests. While the tax withdrawal could be seen as a short-term concession, it was aimed at sustaining long-term trade stability and preserving the broader economic relationship with its most significant partner. In a recent appearance on Fox News, Donald Trump remarked that Canada should become the 51st state of the United States, an offhand comment that sparked widespread media attention. While likely rhetorical, such statements are part of a broader negotiating style that prioritizes psychological impact and unpredictability to shift the momentum of trade discussions.
We will, every single one, we don't want to do anything bad, but they have, economically, we have such power over Canada. I'd rather not use it, but they did something with our tech companies today trying to copy Europe. You know, they copied Europe. It's not going to work out well for Europe either, and it's not going to work out well for Canada.
Trump's approach, often described by analysts as a form of political shock tactics, involves issuing strong declarations to unsettle the negotiating table and force concessions. While this can generate short-term leverage, it also introduces uncertainty for corporate planning and investment strategies. Threats of retaliatory tariffs, including those potentially targeting Canadian agricultural or manufactured exports, could disrupt key supply chains and introduce volatility into both nations' economic outlooks. Unstable negotiation environments complicate price forecasting, affect consumer spending patterns, and create obstacles for long-term business strategy. While Trump's methods aim to put pressure on trading partners and enhance American leverage, they also come with risks. Domestic businesses, farmers, and consumers may face unintended consequences due to the resulting uncertainty in international trade policy. Prime Minister Mark Carney's decision to pull back the DST was presented as a pragmatic move to prevent a breakdown in trade negotiations. However, some experts have cautioned against allowing this to set a precedent for over-reliance on a single trading partner. Several opinion pieces in publications such as Fair Observer have urged Canada to further develop its autonomy in areas such as foreign policy, economic strategy, and national defense to reduce vulnerability to abrupt changes in American political direction. While the withdrawal of the tax may help reset the diplomatic table, many argue that it also underscores the need for a more diversified and resilient policy framework. To that end, symbolic gestures like inviting King Charles III to deliver the throne speech in Canada are seen not only as ceremonial, but also as affirmations of national sovereignty. These acts serve to convey that Canada maintains an independent role in international affairs, despite the significant influence of its southern neighbor. When national policy appears to be frequently adjusted in response to external pressure, it can erode public confidence in long-term government commitments and diminish predictability for businesses. By decreasing its dependency on the United States, Canada could encourage American exporters to diversify their customer base or reevaluate strategic approaches to the Canadian market. The government's decision reflects a conscious weighing of short-term advantages such as restoring trade dialogue, against long-term objectives, including preserving national decision-making authority. While it may yield benefits in the immediate term, the episode has prompted renewed public discussion about the importance of strengthening Canada's internal economic foundation and cultivating a broader portfolio of global partnerships. Canada's decision to set aside the digital services tax represents a pivotal moment in the nation's evolving trade relationship with the United States. While the tax was designed to foster equity in the digital economy, its suspension illustrates how fiscal and foreign policy must often navigate a landscape shaped by diplomatic realities and shifting power dynamics. Every policy choice carries trade-offs. What is notable in this case is that both nations are actively pursuing their respective national interests, one through assertive negotiation and another through careful calibration. The contrast in approach highlights broader questions about how countries adapt their strategies to a global environment increasingly defined by realignment and geopolitical complexity. More than just a matter of economic interests, such negotiations signal how countries define their roles, assert their values, and respond to pressure in a world where the lines between domestic policy and international relations are increasingly blurred. Tensions between the U.S. and Canada over steel, dairy, and trade policies are impacting industries and everyday life across the border. Will American families face lasting changes in prices and choices because of these international disputes? The U.S. recently raised tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from Canada to a steep 50%, according to Reuters and Bloomberg. In response, Ottawa avoided harsh words or broad retaliation, instead quietly introducing flexible import quotas and adjusting tariffs on select American goods. Despite this soft approach, Canada withdrew its proposed digital services tax, but stood firm on not making further concessions, as U.S. tariffs still remain in effect. This silent negotiation strategy signals a shift in Canada's approach to dealing with its largest trading partner, choosing a calculated path over open confrontation. Trade experts note that such targeted moves allow Canada to keep the door open for future talks while minimizing disruptions to its own economy. For American consumers, this shift may soon be felt in higher costs. U.S. industries that rely heavily on Canadian steel and aluminum, especially auto manufacturing and construction, are already facing increased expenses for raw materials. This cost pressure could translate into higher prices for new cars, home building, and essential equipment, directly affecting millions of households and workers. Some contractors report project delays as material prices rise, while car dealerships in several states warn of possible inventory shortages if the situation persists through the summer. Looking ahead, analysts warn that unless a compromise is reached, price hikes could intensify across several sectors. Industry forecasts from the Peterson Institute for International Economics suggest the tariffs could add hundreds of dollars to the price of an average car and several thousand to the cost of building a new home by next year. The prospect of a protracted standoff leaves American families and businesses in a state of uncertainty about the true cost of these trade battles. Recent weeks have seen the U.S. and Canada clash over dairy, with President Trump criticizing Canada for imposing tariffs ranging from 200% to 400% on U.S. dairy exports, exceeding USMCA quota limits. In retaliation, the U.S. accuses Canada of protecting its farmers at the expense of American producers. As a result, the price for American milk has dropped by $1.70 per hundredweight since last quarter, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. This sharp decline, coupled with lost access to the Canadian market, has forced many U.S. dairy farmers, especially in Wisconsin and Minnesota, to the brink of bankruptcy. For American families, the fallout is visible at both the grocery store and on the farm. Milk and butter prices have become increasingly unpredictable, fluctuating as trade tensions persist. Some consumers report paying more for butter, while others see local shortages. Meanwhile, Canadian dairy farmers have received over 6.5 billion Canadian dollars in government aid to help weather the storm, putting U.S. producers at a competitive disadvantage. Looking ahead, the situation remains volatile. Analysts at Rabobank predict that if tariffs and quotas remain unresolved, small dairy operations across the U.S. Midwest may be forced to consolidate or close by the end of the year. American shoppers could face more frequent price swings and less choice in the dairy aisle, making family budgeting even more challenging. Canada has taken broad measures to protect its economy, enacting the One Canadian Economy Act to unify internal markets and lessen reliance on U.S. supply chains. Provincial governments are increasing transportation fees for goods crossing from the U.S., raising electricity tariffs, and signaling a new era of coordinated Canadian policy. The public is responding as well, with major supermarket chains pulling U.S. products from shelves, and the Dollar Buy Canadian movement gaining ground across social media. For Americans, these policies mean fewer opportunities for cross-border trade. U.S. exporters, especially those dealing in agriculture and food products, are rapidly losing their foothold in the Canadian market. Data from the U.S. Census Bureau show a significant drop in food exports to Canada in the last quarter, as distribution channels tighten and trade restrictions take hold. Experts predict this economic wall will grow taller if tensions continue. Forecasts from the Canadian Chamber of Commerce suggest that, by next year, American food and agricultural exports to Canada could fall by over 20%, costing U.S. businesses billions in lost sales. As the movement to buy Canadian strengthens, American companies may need to find new markets or innovate to survive the shifting trade landscape. Disagreements over tariffs, digital taxes, and dairy policies are shaking the very foundation of the USMCA trade agreement. According to the New York Times, the U.S. is considering taking Canada to the World Trade Organization or invoking the USMCA's own retaliation clauses. If the pact unravels, Americans could see dramatic changes, higher import costs, product shortages, and widespread supply chain disruptions. Many U.S. manufacturers and consumers could be left scrambling as prices rise and availability drops. Border states such as Michigan and New York may feel the pinch first, with governors already exploring local solutions to secure energy supplies and critical imports. Consumer prices could climb further, while U.S. supply chains become less efficient, potentially affecting millions of jobs. Looking forward, economic analysts at the Council on Foreign Relations warn that a breakdown in North American trade rules could lead to a fragmented system, forcing states and businesses to negotiate their own deals. Such uncertainty threatens long-term growth and stability, making it harder for American families to plan and prosper in the years ahead. Forecasts suggest continued volatility and shifting ground in U.S.-Canada trade relations, with real impacts for American homes and businesses. Now is the time for Americans to stay informed, advocate for fair solutions, and plan wisely for whatever may come next. New import taxes drive up costs for cars, homes, and construction, putting pressure on consumers and businesses. Is the policy of self-reliance unintentionally steering the U.S. economy into difficult terrain? New import tariffs are putting significant pressure on U.S. car prices. A 25% tariff on vehicles and auto parts has raised average new car prices by $5,000 to $6,000 USD, potentially driving several affordable models out of the market. Around 50% of the 50 top-selling vehicles in the U.S. are directly affected, including popular models like the Honda CR-V, Toyota RAV4, Chevy Trax, and Subaru Forester. Analysts warn the U.S. market could lose 2.5 to 3 million sales, reducing industry output and pushing up used car prices due to shifting demand. For consumers, buying a new car, already a major expense, is now less accessible, especially for middle and low-income households. Many may turn to used vehicles, where prices are also rising. Automakers and dealers face higher costs and weaker sales, which may force cutbacks in incentives, production, or even jobs. Since auto spending represents a large share of U.S. consumption, these price shocks could affect broader economic momentum. Tariffs on construction materials like aluminum, steel, and lumber are driving up housing costs. Experts estimate these policies could raise the cost of a new home by up to USD $22,000 within a year. With 85% of softwood lumber imported from Canada, domestic lumber prices rose 23% in April 2025. Small contractors are struggling to remain competitive and meet deadlines. The average U.S. home now costs USD $460,000, and over 100 million households are already unable to afford a home, a figure still rising. Construction cost increases are locking young families and first-time buyers out of the market. Mortgages are also harder to access as prices climb while incomes stagnate. Builders, pressured by rising costs and slowing demand, are delaying or canceling projects, which threatens construction jobs and slows housing supply, directly affecting national housing stability goals. While tariffs aim to promote local production, U.S. aluminum and lumber sectors face deep challenges. The number of aluminum smelters has dropped from nearly 30 to just 4, far below domestic needs. Reopening or building new facilities takes 8 to 10 years and hinges on electricity costs. Smelters require power under $40 per megawatt hour. But AI data centers now pay up to $115 per megawatt hour, outbidding manufacturers and delaying investment. Meanwhile, the U.S. lumber sector struggles with labor shortages and limited infrastructure. 1/3 of home-building lumber still comes from Canada, as domestic capacity cannot scale quickly. Processing plants face workforce gaps, and investment in production infrastructure remains slow. This delays import substitution, keeps material prices high, and strains both construction and real estate markets. Without a clear mid- to long-term strategy, tariffs could have the opposite effect, raising prices and weakening competitiveness for U.S.-made goods at home.
As of July 4, 2025, over 13 million lawful immigrants in the U.S. have entered a period of historic change. The largest immigration reform in 3 decades, known as OBBA, is now in effect. So, what does this sweeping new law mean for green card holders and immigration applicants? On July 3, 2025, the U.S. Congress officially passed the One Big Beautiful Bill for America, or OBBA, aimed squarely at tightening immigration control. Just 1 day later, on Independence Day, President Donald Trump signed it into law, marking a major political milestone in his second term. Contrary to the hopes of many immigrant communities, OBBA does not expand green card access, improve family reunification, or raise skilled worker visa quotas. Instead, the law focuses on 3 core areas: expanding ICE detention centers nationwide, enhancing border fencing and surveillance technology, increasing the speed and scope of expedited deportations, even for minor violations. This hardline shift poses serious challenges for sectors like agriculture, construction, and healthcare, all heavily reliant on temporary visa holders and permanent residents. Internal reports estimate labor shortages could hit 20 to 25% by 2026, especially in states like Texas and California. One of ABBA's most notable and controversial changes is its expanded oversight of lawful permanent residents, a group once considered legally stable. Under the new law, USCIS now has authority to re-examine criminal records, including minor infractions from years or even decades ago. The naturalization process is also tightening. Applicants who've spent more than 6 months outside the U.S. must now provide strong documented proof of continued residency or face delays and possible rejection. In addition, green card holders may be denied re-entry if they can't demonstrate solid residential ties. Lease or mortgage agreements, consistent tax filings, proof of U.S.-based income or employment. Together, these measures are creating a new climate of risk, not just for future immigrants, but for long-settled residents who once believed their legal status was secure. Those currently applying for green cards, particularly through marriage or humanitarian programs, now face some of the most rigorous vetting procedures in recent memory. Since July 2025, denial rates have surged, and processing times have ballooned to 12 to 24 months. Filing fees are also expected to rise by the end of the year, adding a significant financial burden for immigrant families. A proposed Gold Card program, meant to replace the EB-5 investor visa and requiring a $5 million minimum investment, remains stalled in congressional committees with no timeline for implementation. This uncertainty threatens the U.S. startup ecosystem, which depends heavily on immigrant capital and talent, especially in tech, retail, and creative industries. In light of the law's enforcement, experts are urging legal immigrants to take proactive steps to secure their status. Key recommendations include: avoid extended stays abroad without clear documentation of U.S. residency. Keep copies of tax returns, rental agreements, and income records. Limit or consult legal counsel before accessing social benefits. Apply for U.S. citizenship as soon as eligible. If married to a U.S. citizen, maintain strong evidence of a shared life, such as joint bank accounts, photos, and correspondence. With heightened scrutiny of immigration files, multicultural communities, especially in California, Texas, Florida, and New York, face the risk of losing lawful residents. This could have long-term impacts on local economies and community stability.
He said if Canada works with the U.S. to stop the flow of fentanyl, he might consider adjusting the tariffs.
Former President Trump has threatened a sweeping 35% tariff on Canadian imports. And Canada is already preparing strong countermeasures.
Possibly millions of Americans that are going to be terminated because of this trade deal.
Could these trade tensions reshape North America's economic future? President Donald Trump recently announced plans to impose a 35% tariff on selected Canadian imports during a speech in Ohio, citing what he calls unfair trade practices. Trump accused Canada of exploiting the U.S. and hinted at a possible U.S. withdrawal from the USMCA agreement if Ottawa refuses to compromise. This move follows a series of tariff increases on steel and aluminum, and previous threats to U.S.-Canada agricultural trade. According to the Associated Press, in 2023, the U.S. imported nearly $90 billion in goods from Canada, making it the U.S.'s largest trading partner. If the proposed tariffs take effect, everyday Americans could soon face sharply higher prices on Canadian goods, such as food, lumber, minerals, electricity, and beef retirees, blue-collar workers, and residents in agricultural states may feel the strain most acutely. For example, U.S. food prices could rise by up to 8% for items sourced from Canada, and certain regions, particularly in the Midwest, would bear the brunt of these increases. Forecasts suggest nearly 12 million Americans could see higher household expenses by year's end if tariffs are enacted. Canada's government swiftly responded, vowing to defend its domestic market and supply chains. Officials warned that any 35% tariff from the U.S. would trigger immediate countermeasures, such as import restrictions, energy contract cancellations, and reduced investment in U.S. markets. Prime Minister Mark Carney stated Canada will not be threatened and is accelerating trade deals with the EU and Asia to reduce reliance on U.S. commerce, according to Reuters. Canada's two-way trade with the EU grew by 17%. Last year, export-driven industries such as U.S. auto, agriculture, and industrial equipment could lose market share in Canada, threatening millions of American jobs in states like Michigan, Ohio, Iowa, and Texas, where up to 1.2 million workers depend on exports. Data show Canada's jobless rate fell to 6.9% in June, with 59,000 new jobs added, particularly in healthcare, construction, and education, marking the first employment rise in 5 months. As American workers contend with layoffs tied to supply chain disruption and rising input costs, Canada is seeing a surge in global orders and new employment opportunities. This contrast underscores a bitter reality for the U.S. labor force. If the trend continues, projections indicate U.S. unemployment in affected sectors could rise by 1.2 million in the next 6 months, while Canada could add an additional 150,000 jobs in trade-sensitive industries. Canada's central bank holds rates steady, buoyed by its stable economy, while Ottawa invests heavily in retraining workers for green tech and renewable energy. It is actively pursuing new export agreements amid U.S.-China and U.S.-EU tensions, with Canada focused on future-oriented growth and U.S. locked in protectionist tactics. A widening competitive gap may emerge. Analysts warn that if the U.S. doesn't pivot, it could miss out on up to $50 billion in export opportunities over 5 years.